Yeah, Kenton gave me a little admonishment this morning. He gave me the check early. And he says, now don't be skating out on us just because you got the check early. Got a job to do here. And just so you know, it's not the money we come for. It's the opportunity to be here. You know that already, right? And it's just great to be together. And I don't care what you do in future times. We just love coming. You don't have to pay us. It's just nice to be here to bring a message and to fellowship with you folks. But it is fun. It is fun to be here. I appreciate what... is it okay if I just move this music here? You guys will figure this out later. Yeah. Do another song. Right? You're big boys. You can handle that, so that's good. Anyways, the comment that was made earlier about taking a drive to somewhere where you've got to take a big bus and kind of pre-plan, get your route, and make sure you're comfortable parking that bus. And as you said that this morning, I think that's kind of what Sundays are like for us as believers. We got a big trip planned, and we're already on the trip. But we land in this place, we worship together, we pray together, we fellowship together. It's a little piece of heaven, and we're just trying to find our way so that when that day finally comes, when we're going to be with the Lord forever, we'll already we already know where we're supposed to be. And it's just good to always have that in mind, that every time we get together with believers is a little taste of heaven. Well, I'm going to go maybe a bit of an interesting direction this morning. Preparing for heaven. Where do we see heaven? In whom do we see heaven? In whom do we see the likeness of Jesus? Do we see the likeness of Jesus only in those people that we admire the most, the people whose podcasts we listen to, the great preachers and teachers, the great worship leaders that we love to watch over and over again and hear their voices and to see their faces? Is it those people that we see a little bit of heaven in? The preachers that you love to listen to. I remember a number of years ago in one of the previous churches I was pastoring, not this one, one individual came to me and said, "Hey, do you listen to John Hagee? Do you listen to his preaching?" And I says, "Well, as a matter of fact, no." I'm kind of busy to be listening to all these preachers. He says, "You got to listen to John Hagee. Pastor, you got to preach more like John Hagee." I just looked at him and I said, "Brother, I appreciate that, but I'm not John Hagee." And I got to be Larry. That's all I can do. That's all I can do. But people can see Jesus in John Hagee, and that's great. And I trust that as you look in one another's eyes, you see Jesus in each other's eyes. Well, let's take that just another step further. What about those people in life that you really have disagreements with and challenges with? Even apart from your own family. Those people that you really struggle to be around sometimes. Maybe it's in the church, maybe sometimes it's a neighbor, maybe it's someone that you've had a run-in with, maybe it's someone that from the news reports has done some atrocious things. Or you see this person occasionally and they don't look all put together. Maybe they're pushing a grocery cart down the street with most of their earthly belongings in them. Can you see Jesus in their faces? Do you see Jesus in their eyes? How do we look at broken people? Really broken people. Can we somehow see Jesus in addicts? In those who are homeless? In those who have had sexually immoral lives? Maybe prostitutes? Maybe those who partake of prostitute services? What about people who are mentally ill and they battle with schizophrenia or other mental brokenness? What about those kinds of people? When you brush up against them, when you get to know them, is it possible to see Jesus in their brokenness? Sometimes when we look at people, we tend to look at what we see from the outside. That's human nature. I do that all the time. I make prejudgments. And then I tell my wife what I'm thinking, and she tunes me up pretty quick sometimes. And reminds me, Larry, you got to look at it from a different perspective. Remember 1 Samuel 16, where it says, when they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab and thought, surely this is the Lord's anointed. He had seen this man and he thought, this guy's all put together. He checks all the boxes of what a king should be. But the Lord said to Samuel, don't judge by his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Back when I decided to go back to Bible college to get into pastoring, in the college I was attending, I was a married student, had a couple of kids already, and no, we had one child at that time, and another one came before I was finished school there. But there was one professor, and as the first day or so, we're sitting down and we're introduced to the faculty. And we were told that one of these faculty people will be your student faculty advisor. They will make sure that you're getting the right courses, that you've got things lined up and all the rest of this. And as I'm scanning the crowd of people sitting on the platform, one man stuck out, and I thought, I hope he's not my advisor. He did not look put together. He looked a little disheveled, just his tie was crooked. Maybe that's what I was looking at. I don't know. He just looked kind of geeky to me, and the way he presented himself when he talked, I'm thinking, I don't want that guy as my advisor. Well, you know what happened. He was my advisor. But as I got to know him over the next few days and then the next few years, I saw a brilliant man. I saw a man with a heart that was huge. I saw a man who had capabilities and connections not only in the college level, but on the national level and on the international level. He carried himself with humility, and he was very wise. And that was just one of those lessons to me. Larry, don't look so much at the outward appearance. I may miss a connection with someone that God wants to teach me something deep from. Proverbs 27:17 says, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. We've heard that verse before, we've read it before. The Hebrew transliteration word for word into the English is iron sharpens, so a man sharpens the countenance of another. So one person, a man or woman, rubs off on another person and it changes the other person's countenance or their demeanor. We have an effect on one another. And again, I'm going to come back to people who seem to be very broken people. And one of the reasons I come back to that is because when Jesus first came to this world, he landed right in the middle of very, very broken people. And I wonder what Jesus thought as he got older, as he began to grasp more deeply the mission that he was called to perform amongst people in this world. I wonder if there were times when he thought, Father, what did you get me into? What did you get me into? These people are incorrigible. They won't change. They've got some really mixed up ideas about who you are. And we know that that was kind of God's heart towards the nation of Israel at times. It was pretty tough. But I think Jesus was wiser and more mature, and he was able to see through the junk in our humanity. And he saw hope, and he saw wonder. And I wonder if he saw a little bit of himself. So what can a crack addict and a homeless derelict addict, alcoholic, teach any one of us about God? What can those kinds of people, in the middle, in the depth of their stuff, and sometimes we walk over them, sometimes we walk around them, sometimes we bump into them, what can they possibly teach us who are in the church? Because we're pretty righteous stuff, right? What can we learn? Can we learn anything? I think the answer to that question is simply and profoundly far more than we might think. The Apostle Paul keeps one's humility in check in writing to the followers of Jesus in Corinth when he says, God chose things the world considers foolish in order to shame those who think they are wise. And he chose things that are powerless to shame those who are powerful. God chose things despised by the world, things counted as nothing at all, and used them to bring to nothing what the world considers important. As a result, no one can ever boast in the presence of God. And that's a good thing. None of us can ever boast in the presence of God. You know, I probably tried it occasionally, tried to boast a little bit, and then someone who's down and out comes along and actually shows more wisdom and more compassion. And you gulp and you say, I'm sorry, Lord. Thanks for bringing this person into my life to show me something about myself. Well, over the years, in the different churches that I've pastored, I've had the opportunity to mix it up with people who would be considered very, very broken. I don't come from that background. Let me qualify that. I come from a good family, good parents. Grew up going to church twice on every Sunday. Middle of the week. Kids club, kids choir, youth group, adult choir. Started serving in church, volunteering as a young person, and then married, volunteering with youth, and so on and so on and so on. Came from a good family. But as I've learned over the years, the term family really means dysfunctional. Because every family has its dysfunctions. And all of us as people are dysfunctional. We're not born into life all put together. And so, let's look at some dysfunctional people this morning that are remarkably dysfunctional. And yet I would say, when you look into their eyes, even in their brokenness, we see something of Jesus in them that we can take away and learn from. They add value to our lives. One of those people was a crack addict named Dana. She was a prostitute. And I met her one day at a coffee shop in Medicine Hat. It wasn't intentional, but I was having a nice, quiet coffee and conversation with a fellow pastor friend. And then this woman comes walking by. I'm not going to guess at how old she was because I think she looked a whole lot older than she really was. She did not look put together, although you could see there was an attractiveness to her, but life had been extremely hard. She wasn't aging well. And she was agitated. She would walk past her table, pace back and forth, go up to the front of the coffee shop, come to the back of the coffee shop, walk to the front of the coffee shop, come to the back where we were sitting. And as I watched her come and go, I thought, this is a distracted person. And something is about to happen. And then I noticed as she went to the front of the coffee shop one more time, she started grabbing things and her voice became agitated to the people that worked at the front of the coffee shop. And I said to my pastor friend Mark, I said, we got to do something. And so I didn't know what to do, but I walked out. And I went by her and I just simply said, can I buy you a coffee? Would you like a coffee and just come and sit with us for a minute? And she kind of took a step back and like, who are you? Who are you? And I just said, it looks like you're having a bit of a tough time. Can we have a coffee with you? So she let me buy her a coffee. When I took her to our table, we set another chair up and we sat down. But she would sit down and then she would stand up, walk back and forth and sit down and go back and forth and back and forth. And I did not know much about addictions or anything like that. It wasn't my background, wasn't familiar. However, I knew something was amiss. So, in talking with her, she expressed that she was agitated in part because she didn't have a place to live. She was on the street, didn't know where she was going to go. So, I thought, well, can we call the safe house, the women's shelter? And she said, yeah, that would be okay. So Mark dialed the number, and we talked with her, and we got her name Dana. And we said, we've got a woman here. Do you know her name, sir? Her name's Dana. Does she look like this? Gave a description. We said, yes. Oh, she's familiar to us. We'll have a place ready for her. Bring her on down. So we brought her on down. And both of us went together in my car. We drove her there and got her set up in the safe house, where she had apparently been a number of times before. Fast forward, maybe 2 weeks or so, I'm downtown at one of the city parks. One of the other agencies in town was putting on a barbecue. And the idea was to do something for people who were hungry, who were maybe homeless, but were disenfranchised from society. And they had a nice barbecue. So I wanted to go and show support. And as I'm walking through the crowd in the park, there's Dana. She's leaning up against a tree, and she's enjoying a hamburger. So I came up to her and I said, hey, Dana, how are you doing? She looked at me and said, oh, okay, I guess. Better. I said, can I sit down? Yeah, come sit down. So I sat down on the grass just across from her, people milling all over the place. And I said, well, what's new? And she says, well, I'm in a place now. I've got a home. And I said, oh, where's that? And she kind of tried to tell me, and then she said, so who are you again, and what do you do? And I said, do you remember me? And she says, yeah, I remember you. You took me to the safe house. Yeah. She says, who are you? I said, I'm a pastor here in town. Oh, what church do you pastor? I said, River Park Church. Do you know where that is? She says, yeah, I do. That's just 2 blocks from where I'm living now. I said, awesome. I said, you should come over sometime and we can talk some more. And then she began to tell me how she was really doing. Yes, she was in a home, but she began to pull up her shorts quite high and showed me bruises on her thighs. She pulled up her shirt and she showed me bruises on her ribs. And she may have had a bit of a black eye still at that point. And then she said, I'm very, very sore. I've been beat up again. Wow. And she said, yeah, guys want things from me and I don't want to give them sometimes. And so they get mad and they beat me up. So wow, it's in my little, nice little Christian brain, I'm trying to compute all of this going, who does that? But you know something, that's more frequent than we would hope to imagine. So it was time for me to leave, and I left the situation. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, I'm sitting in the office of the church in my assistant's office, in Linda's office, administrative assistant. And we're going through the week and talking things out. And all of a sudden we hear the church door open. And then all of a sudden up the stairs, this person comes, and standing in the doorway of this office is Dana. And so I had already told Linda about Dana, and so here she was. And so we said, Dana, good to see you. How are you doing? Oh, I'm okay. Getting better every day. I said, what can we do for you? Well, you said you pray for people, right? I said, yeah, we do. She said, well, can I get some prayer? I said, absolutely. So she said, so like, what do we do? Where do we go? Because the office was pretty tight. And I said, well, let's go out in the sanctuary. We took Dana out in the sanctuary, and she said, so what do I do here? And we were right at the front of the church. I said, well, we can either sit in one of the benches and pray together, or sometimes when we have a church service, people will kneel and have prayer. And she says, well, I can't kneel, but I can sit down. So she squatted down. And it was right in the spot where we would, on the once a month Sunday, we would put the communion table. She was right where the communion table was. And the irony of it was not lost on me. As I was thinking of Dana, she was still saying how broken she was. She couldn't move well because she was still so bruised up in her legs. I was thinking, this is where we have communion. This is where we remember that Jesus said, this is my body which is broken for you. And here I thought, Lord, here's a woman who's asking for prayer. And she's so broken. And you were broken for her. So I said, Dana, how can we pray for you? And she said, oh, I don't want you to pray for me. I want you to pray for all of my friends who don't know Jesus. Now my mind is twirling. And I'm saying, Lord, how does this work? Someone who is so broken and involved in such difficult situations comes in here asking prayer not for herself, but her friends who don't know Jesus. So I said, can we lay hands on you? Just put our hands gently on your shoulders? Yeah, no problem. So Linda's on one side, I'm on the other. We put our hands on her shoulders as she squatted on the floor. And we prayed over her. I prayed, and I just prayed for the love of Jesus to be made real to her friends and to Dana, for healing and hope and all of these good things that Jesus gives to us. And then Linda prayed for her too. When we finished praying, she jumped up and said, well, gotta go. Out she went. And over the next couple of years or so, every once in a while, I would run into Dana downtown near the coffee shops. And I would chat with her for just a few moments. And sometimes she looked okay, and other times she looked like a wreck. The last time I saw her, she was dressed rather well. And I knew what she was into and up to. But we kept praying for Dana. But that last time I saw her, as in previous times when I would chat with her for a moment, it was outside, it was snowing, and I asked her, Dana, how are you doing? And Dana said, I'm okay, I'm okay. And then she started crying, like she did every other time I asked her how she was doing. And she says, oh, I don't know why this happens. Every time I see you, I start crying. And I said, Dana, that's the love of Jesus. He just wants to love you. Just let him love you, Dana. And then off she went. That's the last time I ever saw her. I don't know if she's still alive or not. But there were times when I would take Dana and others like her to prayer, and I would say, God, how does this work? I know you love her so much, but she's living in such brokenness. I talked to another guy who knew who she was one time, a guy who himself had been in and out of all kinds of interesting dilemmas. And he said, oh, I know that woman. And then he intimated to me that there were people who wanted her dead because of the way she treated others sometimes. And I'm saying, Lord, how does this work? Someone so destitute and yet is asking for prayer for her friends so that they would know the love of Jesus. She hasn't apprehended the love of Jesus very well. And so my prayer was always for her. I don't know if she's alive or dead, to be honest, to this day. She was living a very difficult lifestyle. All I can hope is that when I would look into her eyes, that my eyes, my heart, my words, my actions would convey to her her worth in the eyes of Jesus. And I learned that people like Dana are opportunities for us to share his love and to be humble enough to receive something from them at the same time. Whatever it is the Lord wants to teach us and show us. And then receive it with gratitude. And then there's Gregory D. Gregory was an alcoholic, homeless man who somehow, through the ministries of our little church, we got to know him. And at some point, he actually started coming to church. Now, he would couch surf a lot. Still homeless, didn't have his own address. I went finally with him to one of the license issuing places and vouched for him because he didn't have any identification at all. And without identification, you can't receive government assistance and so on and so forth. So I took him through that process. But Greg would come to church occasionally. And others in the church really started to gel to Greg. He was one of those guys who you warmed up to. He was a little guy. A little bit of a beard. He'd slick his hair back really nicely. And Sunday mornings, when he'd come, he'd sit pretty much in the front. And he'd roll cigarettes during the service. And then halfway through the service, he'd get up, go outside, have a smoke or two, then he'd come back in and resume his time in church. And I remember there were times when he and I had some amazing chats together. I would visit him at another friend's house that he had, where he sometimes took up residence on the couch. And it was a house that the first time I went into it, and after I spent just a few minutes there, when I came out, I wanted to throw up. The smell was so bad. Greg's friend Peter, not this Peter, a very different Peter, Greg's friend Peter never bathed, and he never changed his clothes, and he never cut his hair, and he never cut his fingernails. He never cut his beard. Peter would sit there nursing a warm beer all day long, and Greg would be with him, and they'd be nursing their beer. But I would go into the house, and I would visit with them and chat with them. I got to love those guys. And after every visit that I had with Peter, sometimes I'd go, and it would only be Peter there. Sometimes there'd be a small crowd of his friends. But every time it was time for me to make an exit, I would say, Peter, can I pray for you? Oh yes, Pastor, you can pray for me. He didn't have any teeth. As a matter of fact, one day I asked Peter, how many children do you have? Let me think. He said, I think I got 6. No, wait, I think it might be 7. And that's how Peter would talk. He did have a lot of kids. Most of them disowned him. But as we chatted, and I would make my exit, I would say, can I pray for you? He'd say, yes, you can pray for me. And I would just pray a prayer of blessing over him. I'd pray the love of Jesus over him. And then I'd get up to leave, and I'd always shake his hand and sometimes come in for a hug. I had gotten used to the aroma. And every time I did that, I would say, after I pray, I'd say, no, Peter, I love you. And you know God loves you too. And he'd look into my eyes and he'd say, I love you too. And then I'd walk out and go on my way. The best that he could muster was to say those things in the midst of his difficulties. And somehow I could see Jesus in his eyes. But getting back to Greg, we'd visit there, and the one day when we were visiting with Peter, Greg and I were talking about the church service. We were talking about how good it was to come to church, and it wasn't just that there was stellar preaching or anything like that, but there was good fellowship, and there was coffee, and there was friendship. And as we were talking about those things, I said to Peter, Peter, you should come sometime. You'd have fun. And Peter was reclusive. He never went out. We said, Peter, you should come sometime. We'd love to have you. And so I said, there's coffee there. Because he really liked coffee too. And it was at that, Gregory, I'm not going to repeat exactly what he said. Oh, Pastor, blank the coffee. I just want to talk about Jesus. That was Greg's heart. In church one Sunday morning, I was in the middle of a sermon and talking about You know, the passage where Jesus is talking about if someone has two of something and someone else needs something, that person should give them something and help them out. And Greg was sitting in the front row, arms crossed, listening. His hand goes up. Pastor, I wish that would happen more often in churches sometimes. I said, yes, Greg, you got a question? He says, I got a question. So what's your question, Greg? He said, so what you're saying is that if I've got something and someone else needs it, I should give it to that person because they need it. I said, that's exactly what Jesus is saying to us. Folded his hands, his arms, like he says, I thought so. It got so quiet. Because everybody got to know Greg by this point. We knew he was homeless. We knew that he could carry all of his possessions in a small box. We also knew that he was generous to a fault, that if someone needed something, he would indeed take the shirt off his back and give it to someone else if they asked for it. That was who he was. It was quiet. And I saw tears forming in people's eyes. And these are good people. And some of them very wealthy and successful people, but also very generous people. It brought us close to Greg. And it's like Greg's heart was saying, I know Jesus. Yeah, I drink too much. Yeah, I do a lot of things. But I know Jesus, and I'm doing my best. It was sometime after that I saw him walking down the street one day, and so I stopped to give him a ride. And we chatted as we went along. And he said, oh, Pastor, I didn't tell you. Tell me what? He says, I quit drinking. Well, you did? Oh, when was that? Oh, about a month ago. And then he rehearses for me the date. And I said, well, that's terrific. That's awesome. How are you feeling? I'm feeling good. And he said, I haven't had any aspirations to go back to the bottle within the last month. It's been good, Pastor. I was really excited for Greg, because numerous ones of us were praying for him, that he would overcome that addiction. Later that day, I called up one of the fellows in the church who had developed a real special relationship with Greg. He prayed for him often. And I said to him, guess what I heard from Greg today? He told me that he quit drinking. Oh, you're kidding. I said, yeah, it was a month ago. And he's going, whoa, wait a minute, a month ago. He says, do you know the day? I said, yeah, he told me the day. It was this day. And my friend was calculating in his mind, and all of a sudden he says, you are kidding. I says, what? He said, I remember that day. That was the day when I was in prayer for Greg, and something came over me, and I was praying and pleading. And then I announced, God, this is the day that Greg stops drinking. This is the day. It's got to stop today. And he said, and he did. I said, isn't God good? He hears our prayers, and he answers our prayers. And then the other thing that really caught my attention from Greg was one day before the service, he came really early. I was there, I opened the doors, and all of a sudden Greg walks in. He says, Pastor, can I talk with you? I says, yeah, Greg, you can talk with me. What's up? He says, you got to tell me if I'm going crazy. Kind of chuckled to myself. I said, what do you mean? He says, no, I'm serious. He said, I had a dream. I said, tell me your dream. So we sat down. He said, I dreamt that I was praying. I was praying for you, and I was praying for other people in the church. I was praying for your wife and your family and other people in the church, the leaders of the church and anybody that came to mind. I was praying for them. But as I was praying for them in my dream, I was weeping in my dream. And I'm thinking, that's a beautiful dream. And then he says, but the thing is, Pastor, when I woke up, my pillow was soaking wet because I had been weeping in my sleep as I was dreaming. And I said, you know something, Greg? You're not going crazy. The Holy Spirit's getting a hold of you. And he's speaking to you in your sleep. And he's calling you to pray for people even as you sleep. I said, that's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. I saw Jesus in that man's eyes a lot. Before he quit drinking and after he quit drinking. When he'd get up and go for a smoke in the middle of a service and come back, I saw Jesus in his eyes. He taught me a lot. He taught me to see myself with humility. He taught me to be careful how I looked at other people, not to judge others for what they were going through or what they were into, but to, in humility, come alongside other people and walk with them and try and understand them. And you know, there were times when those kinds of people, the people who were so broken, were there for me when sometimes other people weren't. I think of times when we had our Oasis Cafe, when we would open up the church on Thursday mornings and have people come in, people who were destitute and broken and hungry, 40 to 70 people every Thursday morning. And one time there was an altercation outside. Somebody was swearing and yelling and accusing. And they said, those guys outside, they want to bring this guy outside because they want to beat him up. And I'm thinking, this is not good PR for the neighborhood. These guys are getting loud and raucous. And we're right in the middle of a community. So I went out and I walked to the sidewalk where these guys were and I said, guys, that's enough. You can't be doing this. Oh yeah, but that guy, blah, blah, blah. And I said, doesn't matter. That might even be true, but this isn't how you settle it, and it's not going to be done this way. There's people that live in this neighborhood, there's little kids walking around. You can't be doing this here. And they sort of settled down, and I said, it needs to stop. Okay. 15 minutes later, fired up. Well, before I went in, just as I turned to leave those guys, I bumped into one of the guys from the church. And this guy had a muscle shirt on, really long hair. He was one of our regulars, beard. And I said, oh, sorry, I didn't see you there. He said, no problem, Pastor, but you got to know, you can't come out here by yourself. I got your back. You call me, I'll help you next time. I said, okay. 15 minutes later, the ruckus started again. And I thought, oh, these guys, we're going to end up calling the police to clear them out of here. I went outside again. I had the same conversation with them. And I explained, this time, if you don't settle down, I will have to call the police because this is not good. And they promised to leave, and they started leaving. I turned around and I bumped into a different guy. And this guy was an older fellow, and he volunteered. And this same scenario, I bumped into him. I didn't see him. He was standing so close. And I said, sorry, I didn't see you there. He said, that's okay, Pastor. But you need to know, you shouldn't come out here by yourself. And then he says, I've got a black belt in karate. I can handle myself and I can handle these guys. I've got your back. So two guys from pretty difficult backgrounds telling me, don't do this alone. I've got your back. And then Greg, weeping in his sleep, saying he's interceding for us in prayer. I saw Jesus in those people's eyes. What did Jesus see in the faces of his disciples when he called them to follow him? Maybe he saw a lot of work ahead. Maybe he could tell, these are young guys, they're not polished. I've got my work cut out for me. But I think he did see diamonds in the rough. I think he saw faces full of hope and promise. And I think maybe in some ways he saw himself. Because these young guys were made in the image of God. Just like Greg and Peter and Dana, all made in the image of God. Just like you and I. What did Jesus see in the faces of these same young men 3.5 years later as he took bread and broke it and said, "This is my body which is broken for you, and this cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice for you." What did he see then? I think maybe he was thinking, they've come a long way, Father. They look more and more like you and me every day. And maybe he was thinking as he looked at these guys and gave them the bread and the cup, they are ready to further the mission that, Father, you gave me to give them to see your kingdom established and keep growing. What does Jesus see when he looks into your face as you receive the bread and the cup today? His own reflection, great hope and promise, and his love working in and through you. No matter how broken you or I may be, that's what he sees. Kenton, you're going to come lead us, right?